Do you sometimes look back to see where were you 10 years ago, 15 years ago in your life? What has changed for you? What has progressed? Stages of life. That's an important topic. And that's what I'm going to discuss with you today in this episode of our Awakened podcast. Hello, I am Father Nareg. I'm the pastor of St. Sarkis Church in Douglaston. I'm an ordained priest in the Armenian Apostolic Church since 2004. I am also a licensed mental health counselor with a private practice. And one of the things that I love to do is to invite people to live a more meaningful life. Welcome to Awakened, a new episode of our podcast. We are in the middle of organizing the National Representatives Assembly. This is the meeting that takes place once a year, where representatives from different parishes functioning under the Armenian prelacy, the Eastern prelacy, come together and try to have their annual evaluation. And last year it was decided that this year we are going to host this meeting, and we are in the middle of organizing everything because there's a lot involved. And one of the things that you can do to make your life a little bit easier, to cheat in other ways, is to look back and try to see what have you done the previous time when you organized this meeting. And that's what I've been trying to do. I've been looking back to see the ways that we have organized this meeting 10 years ago. And it was actually in 2016 that St. Sarkis Church hosted this meeting. And when I go back to see some of the flyers, the booklets, the advertising, and also some of the photos that we have from 10 years ago, it's interesting that there are some people who were really working hard, but unfortunately, they are no longer with us. They have passed since. There are others who maybe were not as involved as they are involved today. And what I'm trying to do is to look at myself in those pictures and booklets and everything, trying to see where is it that I was 10 years ago, and try to see if there has been any change and progression for the past 10 years. As I try to make that comparison of where was I 10 years ago, mentally, emotionally, and intellectually, made me realize that there was this Danish philosopher whose work I read when I was doing my graduate degree in theology. This person spoke about the stages of life, and it made me go back and do some research on him. So the name of the philosopher is Soren Kierkegaard. It's a very interesting name. The way that I memorized his name, try to bring it close to the Armenian expression, Suren, but not Suren. This is Soren and Kierkegaard. But it's Kierkegaard. Lived in the middle of the 19th century. And one of the things that he spoke about was the stages of life, or he calls it the spheres of existence. He came from the Lutheran tradition, and he was not very comfortable with the cultural Christianity, and his faith made him look at life from the lens of theology. And as a philosopher, he kind of put three stages, and I'd like you to think about the stages that Kierkegaard suggests or proposes. He says that the first stage of life is the aesthetic stage, and this is a stage where we focus on pleasure, experience, avoidance of boredom. Think about that for a minute. That's what we try to do nowadays. We never are bored. And the goal in this stage of life is immediate satisfaction. The lifestyle is very impulsive. It is emotionally driven. It is self-centered. And if there's one thing that is the center of this stage is, I just want to feel good and I just want to be happy. I just want to enjoy life. There are so many people who go through this stage when they're teenagers, early 20s, and they slowly make a transition to the next phase, but not always, because you see so many people who could be in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, and they are still here at this stage. They live their life impulsively, and they're driven by the instinct of, I just want to feel good and I just want to be happy. Well, what's wrong with this way of living? There's one thing that is very common to everyone who is in this stage of life, and that is the idea of emptiness, and not only boredom, but also despair. The longer you try to sustain this lifestyle, you realize that there is a sense of emptiness, that more pleasure is not feeling that. And hopefully that will kind of lead you to the second stage that Kierkegaard speaks about. Now, the second stage he calls the ethical stage, and the hallmark of this stage is living life with responsibility. The focus is duty, morality, and commitment. This is the stage where we start taking responsibility seriously in life. And we kind of look at moral frameworks and we try to find consistency. Usually this happens when we are committed in our careers, when there's marriage, there's service, life gains stability, life gains purpose. And this is a pretty good stage to be in life. And I'm going to give two examples here. One comes from the life of a young man that I know. This man would have hard time even waking up in the morning, let alone trying to commit to a job. So his life was very impulsive, and fortunately for him, people who were around him, family members, parents, constantly pushed him. They never gave up on him. And this gentleman fell in love with a beautiful lady and got married, and soon after ended up having a child. And that created a shift in his life, because suddenly he found himself to be a responsible human being, responsible for a young child, responsible for a wife. And that whole impulsive stage went away. This happens also on a community level. You know, when communities try to find that sense of commitment, that sense of fulfillment through responsibility. And this week, Armenians worldwide are commemorating the 1915, the 111th anniversary of the Armenian genocide. And one of the things that it's worth thinking about is that after the genocide, in different countries, including the Middle East, Europe, and also the United States and Canada, one thing that is very consistent in every Armenian diasporan community that was established after the genocide is the fact that Armenians became hardworking members of that society. They became innovators. They became people who got things done. So this is an important stage where we know what is the right thing to do and we try to do the right thing. That is the ethical stage, as Kierkegaard calls it. However, when we stay at this stage in life and we are constantly trying to see if we are doing the right thing, and I've seen this in my pastoral work and my work as a counselor, speaking especially with senior members of the community, they question themselves and there's a sense of regret. Did I do enough? Did I always do the right thing? So this makes you look at the life that you lived as something insufficient or incomplete. This leads to the third stage in the hierarchy of Kierkegaard's stages, and that is the religious stage, living by faith. And here is where the authentic selfhood is discovered through faith. This is where the main idea is that I entrust myself fully to God. I know I'm echoing the ideas that I spoke about in my podcast from the previous episode, where we fully accept that God is the captain and we're just a co-pilot. And that is really the ideal way of living. This is not the easiest way of living, because there are paradoxes in this stage of life where faith becomes personal. But the paradox in that personal faith is that you start embracing some ideas that say giving is better than receiving. That goes totally against that first stage where everything was about me, myself, and I, more pleasure, more fun. Here we come to a place where we realize that giving is better than receiving. We come to a place where we realize that emptying the self is important to give that space for God to come and dwell in us. And this is the ultimate stage where we find meaning in our lives. I will share with you something that I witnessed this past week as I was speaking with a couple who are in their late phase, and something very unfortunate happened in their marriage. And I'm trying to help them to repair their relationship. And it's not an easy route for people who have been with each other for 3 decades. The bump that they encountered in that journey is very difficult to overcome. And I was trying to create a roadmap to see how can we navigate this difficult journey. And I have to say that I've been working with them for quite some time now. And one of the partners, who is the victim in this case, said, all I want from you is that you start taking care of yourself. Start practicing self-compassion. This is what I want from you. Because if you're not taking care of yourself, then there's no way that our relationship can survive. And this in itself is very paradoxical, because the person is saying, take care of yourself. That's all I need from you. Don't try to satisfy my needs, because that's not going to help me. So these choices do not happen automatically. It's not like we live 20, 25 years in each stage and then we transition to the next stage. These are choices that we have to make to move from one stage to another. And the other thing that we have to be aware of is that those transitions don't happen naturally. Sometimes they happen because there's a crisis in our lives. There is a desperate situation that we are going through, or there's an awakening in our lives. So I'd like you to examine your lives and see, where are you? Are you someone who is living life purely for selfish reasons? Are you someone who is living only driven by that sense of duty and responsibility? Or have you got to that third stage where you do your part and let God do the rest, where you can say, I can fully trust you, Lord? I hope you're there. And if you're not there yet, make that journey, because it is worth the sacrifices that you make to get to that place in your life. Let us continue reading the Word of God, and we are reading from the Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to John, chapter 5. After this, there was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. There in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, is a pool called in Hebrew Bethzatha, which has 5 porticos. In these lay many individuals, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there a long time, he said to him, do you want to be made well? The sick man answered him, Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I'm making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me. Jesus said to him, Stand up, take your mat, and walk. At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. Now that day was a Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been cured, It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your mat. But he answered them, The man who made me well said to me, Take up your mat and walk. They asked him, Who is the man who said to you, Take it up and walk? Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had disappeared in the crowd that was there. Later Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, See, you have been made well. Do not sin anymore, so that nothing worse happens to you. The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. Therefore, the Jews started persecuting Jesus because he was doing such things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, My Father is still working, and I also am working. For this reason, the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because he was not only breaking the Sabbath, but was also calling God his own Father, thereby making himself equal to God. Amen. This is a story of a man who was always waiting, but was never chosen. He was waiting by this pool for 38 years. So you would think that this man's condition was the fact that he was paralyzed. He couldn't move fast enough to go to this pool. According to their tradition, the angel will come once a year to stir the waters, and the first person who would go into that pool will be healed. 38 years he was waiting. That never happened to him. His problem was not the fact that he was paralyzed, but maybe the fact that he was socially isolated. And when Jesus comes to him, he starts a conversation with him and he asks him, do you want to be healed? Sometimes what we need and what we want are two different things. Sometimes you see a person who clearly needs to pay attention to their physical health. Sometimes they need to pay attention to their emotional health. And definitely they need, just like all of us, we need to pay attention to our spiritual well-being. But that's not what we always want. We always want other things. And our needs and our wants are not always aligned. And this is why Jesus asks this person, do you want to be healed? And he tells him his situation, that there's a line, I cannot make it to the line. Somebody else is always faster than I am, and here I am stuck. And Jesus doesn't do anything to kind of expedite that journey, to put him, in front of that line, but he gives him grace. It's a totally different perspective. When we encounter Jesus, those traditional ways of healing do not apply. And this is what I've always said in my sermons and Bible studies, that you may encounter similar disorders, sicknesses, diseases that people had when they encountered Jesus. But the beautiful thing is that Jesus never used the same method to heal two similar conditions. Everyone got that healing in a different way. And that's the beauty of God's grace. God sees our condition and God has a plan for us. Well, sometimes there are people who are not happy with that change and that transformation, just like the leaders of that day were not happy. They saw this man who was carrying his mat, and that was a sign that those years of being slave to sin is over. This is a new life, a life of freedom from captivity, also from sin. But they're not able to see that. And they go back and take things into their narrow perspective. It's the Sabbath. You cannot do this on the Sabbath. We have other instances where they blame Jesus for healing on the Sabbath, but they forget to see the big picture. The big picture is that God's grace is working with the people, in the people. They're blindsided to that. And they try to find excuses to start harassing and persecuting Jesus because he is healing on the Sabbath. And now he is calling God to be his father. In the Gospel of John, Jesus reveals himself slowly. And here is one of those climactic moments where Jesus says, my Father is still working and I am like my Father. So God doesn't stop working because it is a Sabbath. It is a holiday. God is always working. So Jesus is always giving his grace to us human beings. But I'd like you to pay attention to that instruction that Jesus gives to this person when he finds him the second time in the crowd. He says, go and sin no more, so that worse things would not come to you. Our greatest enemy is not the physical ailments that we suffer with, but it is sin, where we kind of shut the communication between us and God, when we miss the mark, when we focus on other things and forget God. That is sin. In our lives, we are invited to constantly focus on our relationship with God, prioritize God, and make God to be the captain of our ship. I am der Nareg, the pastor of St. Sarkis Church. Stay well, stay healthy, and I will see you next time.